2 hours. That's the amount of time Wilma Denton says she spent trapped in the basement of her home on Timber Lake in Posey County, Indiana, duct taped to a chair, alone in the dark, listening to what she believed were the final moments of her husband's life unfolding somewhere above her. She says she fought to break free from the tape for nearly 2 hours. Eventually, one arm came free, just enough to grab a phone and call 911. It's August 18, 1991. When police arrive just after 2 a.m., they find 78-year-old Arthur Denton dead on the main floor of the home. Arthur was a respected retired Evansville attorney, former state legislator and deputy prosecutor for Vanderburgh County. He had been beaten and stabbed to death inside his own house. Wilma told police that a masked man wearing long black gloves found her in the basement, slapped her, and bound her with duct tape. She then claimed that she heard other men in the house, likely stealing $12,000 in cash, even though Arthur's friends insisted he never kept large amounts of cash on hand. Police never found a murder weapon, and no one was ever charged in Arthur's death. So what really happened inside the Denton's Timber Lake house in the middle of the night? Was it a violent home invasion gone wrong? Or the perfect murder?
Every time we're together, it's overshadowed by the fact that someone's missing, someone very important.
I went to pry it open, and when I kicked the door in, next thing you know was all you seen was my brother, and he was slumped over on the couch, and blood just coming from everywhere.
I offered the cops to go take them to the exact spot I pulled over in. When I turned around, I pulled over and I called my wife, and I'm watching him out my rear view mirror, and he's walking towards the tracks. Where he went from there after I left from that spot, don't know.
I was there at St. Joe and Diamond working, mid-morning. My cell phone rings. I don't recognize the number. So this woman, I didn't recognize her because she was distressed. She says, this man come in and shot me.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of River City Mystery. I am your host, Matt Dyke. In this episode, we're going to be looking into the murder of Arthur Denton in Posey County, Indiana. And this is a really strange case with some twists and turns. And I had actually never heard of this particular case. I did have it on my radar because I have a database on my Discord of all of our cold cases from the region, but I hadn't really dug into it until I started doing research for this episode. And it's a really strange case. It's an unsolved case, and as far as I know, the last article I saw on this, it's not being actively investigated. So my hope is that maybe somebody will hear this and it'll trigger something that may kindle some sort of a phone call or something that might help lead to the solution of this case. So who was Arthur Denton exactly? He wasn't just a lawyer. I mean, he was a lawyer. He was a lawyer in the Evansville, Indiana area for about 50 years. But he was also a former state legislator and 3-time deputy prosecutor for Vanderburgh County. So for many decades, he was a very integral part of the Evansville legal community. For more than 50 years, he lived a very quiet and I would say predictable life with his wife Eunice, and they lived in a very modest home on Taylor Avenue in Evansville. And they lived what's been described as very routine, predictable lives. Like they would go out with their friends, Bill and Sherry Foreman, on Saturday nights. They would go play bridge. Most evenings they would go out to eat. They would go play cards at the Civic Center, or he'd go to shoot pool at the Downtown Elks Club. They didn't really deviate much from that. They were very close to their friends, very communicative, predictable. Bill Foreman, one of his friends who met him at IU School of Law in the 30s, described him as being very careful and reserved. He's a person from the Depression era, so he's kind of shaped by hardship, was the way he worded that. And he never really showed his wealth. So neighbors who lived next door never really knew he had any money at all. Everything kind of collapsed in June of 1990, though. His world kind of came crashing down. On June 21st, 1990, while out with friends, Eunice Denton suffered a ruptured colon and died. So after 50 years of marriage, Arthur was suddenly alone. And friends said from that point on, he was never quite the same. Just 3 months later, Arthur Denton shocked nearly everybody who knew him. On August 14th, 1990, the 77-year-old widower drove to Henderson, Kentucky, and married Wilma Scales. Everyone called her Doodle. That was her nickname. I'm just going to call her Wilma just to keep consistent here, but everyone did call her Doodle at that time, and I'm assuming Arthur did as well. But the differences between those two were hard to ignore. Wilma was 39 years old, so there's about a 40-year age difference by this point. This was Wilma's fourth marriage, and it's thought that they met through Wilma's work because she was a housekeeper or in the janitorial staff at the courthouse where Arthur maintained his office. So at some point they crossed paths, and Wilma ended up as the personal housekeeper for Arthur and Eunice at their own home for 6 months prior to Eunice passing away. So at the time Eunice passed away, Wilma was their housekeeper. And Arthur's closest friends were blindsided by the marriage. Bill Foreman, one of his closest friends, said he was quoted as saying, "I never heard of the second Mrs. Denton. I never met her." The marriage kind of sparked a bunch of quick changes. By October of 1990, Arthur had sold the Taylor Avenue home he lived in for decades. He moved Wilma to the house on Middle Mount Vernon Road in Posey County, right on Timber Lake there. The house is surrounded by a chain link fence, and 4 of Wilma's dogs roamed around this yard in the chain link fence area. There was a beware of dogs sign on the fence. 2 of the dogs were German Shepherds and 2 were mixed breed. So they were pretty much guard dogs. And they would, according to neighbors, those dogs would bark at anything that walked by. They were not quiet, docile dogs. They were guard dogs. That comes into play a little bit later on. In January of 1991, Arthur makes a big change. He revises his will. He names Wilma Denton as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate, which was valued at about $317,000 at that time, which is about $750,000 in today's dollars. 7 months after he made those changes to his will, Arthur Denton was dead. So what exactly happened on the night of August 18th, 1991? Everything we know about that night, for the most part, is from Wilma Denton's account herself. She's the only witness. She's the only one who was there. So there were no other witnesses. There were no neighbors who saw anything. So we have to kind of keep that in mind when we're listening to the story. We have no other person. Obviously, Arthur's voice is not heard in this because he's deceased. What Wilma claims happened was that she was downstairs in the basement making a phone call, or about to make a phone call at 12:15 a.m. While she was in the basement, she heard people enter the house upstairs. She says a man wearing a ski mask and long black gloves found her in the basement, slapped her, and bound her to a chair with duct tape. She claims that while that was going on, she heard other people upstairs with her husband. For the next 2 hours, she claims she sat in the darkness, listening to movement above her, trying to break free from the tape that was tying her to the chair. Finally, around 2 a.m., she broke free from the tape and was able to call 911 for help, which did arrive around 2:15 a.m. Police arrived to find Arthur Denton had been beaten in the head and stabbed multiple times in the neck, and he was deceased on the scene. As investigators examined the scene, they started to notice some inconsistencies, some odd things starting to pile up a little bit. Number one is the dogs. The Dentons had 4 dogs. They had 2 German Shepherds and 2 mixed breeds. They would roam around the chain link fence area, which they were known to bark very aggressively at anyone who walked by. So the neighbors would notice barking often if there were animals in the area or maybe people. That night, the neighbors did not report hearing any aggressive barking or any barking at all, as a matter of fact. The Posey County prosecutor, Kim Kelly Moore, noted in some of the articles I've read about this that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just means that the neighbors may not have heard the barking, or maybe the intruders avoided the dogs. We don't know, but it is an interesting tidbit, I would say. Another interesting tidbit is that Wilma claimed that $12,000 in cash was missing. Now, Arthur's friends, they insist that he was not the type of person to keep $12,000 in cash at the house. He just wasn't. He was the type that would keep that at the bank. It would be very unusual for him to have kept $12,000 in cash at the house. However, Wilma claims that $12,000 is missing. Prosecutors could never confirm that anything had been stolen, other than just Wilma's word that there was $12,000 and it was missing. No murder weapon was ever found, so the police did an exhaustive search. No murder weapon was ever found. Within 2 weeks of the killing, police responded to 2 reported break-ins at the house. So Wilma called the police twice within 2 weeks of Arthur's death to report break-ins. In both cases, nothing was taken, according to Posey County prosecutor Kim Kelly Moore. Another strange turn, on September 8th, 1991, Wilma's brother William Scales committed suicide. He OD'd. So this is about a month or so after Arthur's death. So you start to wonder, like, as the investigators are looking at this, they're thinking, is William somehow, was he paid by Wilma to come in and be involved in this in some way? And he was maybe overwhelmed with guilt and OD'd less than a month after Arthur is killed. Investigators examined the possibility of a connection, but the prosecutor stated that William was actually out of town at the time of the murder. So he was ruled out as a possible participant. But the prosecutor does admit that there are some obvious timing questions that raise eyebrows. One thing that interests me is, it's easy these days to kind of track people with cell phone technology. Like, a lot of people, if you watch these true crime shows, like they will track everywhere you go with your cell phone. Back then, in 1991, people didn't have cell phones. So you wonder how they verify that someone was, quote unquote, out of town or out of the area. At the time, is it just a he said, she said kind of a situation where he says, I was out of town and everyone just has to believe it? I don't know. Either way, it's a strange coincidence. Wilma's brother OD'd less than about a month after Arthur's murder. So that's what it is. And in February of 1992, a grand jury heard testimony from 25 people. They heard from neighbors, police officers, friends. One person who did not testify was Wilma Denton. So she never actually spoke or testified as far as what her side of the story was, and she was the only one that was there. After the prosecutors looked at all the information, they decided not to move forward with any indictments, so there was never anyone charged in Arthur's murder. There was one more interesting tidbit that I came across in one of the articles I read. One of the Denton's next-door neighbors, Jim DeHaven, claims that he heard a prowler around his home. This would have been at 2:30 in the morning on Friday night. This would have been 2 days before the murder. So he hears some sort of disturbance or prowler around his house at 2:30 in the morning. Another family member turns on a light to the outside, I guess, and the prowler apparently flees. He never actually called the police to report the incident, but that is an interesting tidbit. So it's kind of like you wonder if there were people scoping out the area or maybe trying to get around the dogs or something. I don't know, but that is interesting. So it is possible that maybe there were some prowlers who were targeting Arthur for some reason. Several years went by and the case was appearing to go cold, but investigators never really stopped looking at Wilma in this case. I think they always viewed her as being a potential suspect. They just didn't have the evidence to pin the murder on her. They did have something that they had found during the original investigation. While they were searching Wilma's car, they found a check in her glove box. It was a $15,000 check made out to Wilma Scales. Scales was Wilma's maiden name, and the check appeared to be signed by Arthur Denton. Indiana State Police handwriting analysts examined the check and reached a troubling conclusion, you might say. The writing showed characteristics of a quote-unquote simulated forgery. By 1995, Posey County prosecutor Trent Van Haften formally referred to Wilma as a potential suspect. So she'd kind of morphed into potential suspect realm. So they were really trying to pin this on her at this time, and they were just looking for that one piece of evidence to get over the hump, I think. Trent Van Haften requested a handwriting sample to determine whether she had forged the check. Wilma's attorney, a well-known defense attorney John D. Klaus in the Evansville area, argued that spouses frequently sign each other's names and that forcing a sample would violate her Fourth Amendment rights. In December of 1995, Judge James M. Redwine agreed, so she could not be compelled to provide a handwriting sample. And with that ruling, that basically shut the door on that whole avenue of thinking about the forged check and maybe a motive there. According to an article in the Evansville Press dated March 18, 1996, the Posey County Sheriff's Department is no longer actively investigating the case. So this is, for the most part, a closed case that they're not looking into. So My goal of this episode is to shine a light on the case. Maybe there's somebody out there who has heard something secondhand, thirdhand, where that might be relevant to the case. Maybe there were former neighbors that heard or saw something and they were never asked by police at the time and they want to come forward and say something. Either way, somebody out there knows something. Even if Wilma wasn't involved, this involved more than one person. It sounds like it was a little bit of an operation. So that if maybe there's a person out there who said something to somebody else who thinks that was questionable. Now, Arthur didn't have any children, so his obituary lists a couple of nieces and nephews. There aren't people following up on this stuff over the years, and a lot of times when you have these people without any children or close loved ones, these cases just get swept under the rug because it's easy to do that, I think. Arthur spent his whole life following the rules and following the law and doing the right thing as much as he could, I'm sure. I didn't know him personally, obviously, but I don't think he deserved to be forgotten like this. So hopefully someone hears this and it triggers a memory or something that becomes helpful. As far as what became of Wilma, she remained at the house on Middle Mount Vernon Road for a while. And that was the house that Arthur had purchased for them. And she inherited his entire estate worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She eventually moved on and remarried. She married a prominent Evansville area dentist. And whatever secrets that she knew and didn't tell anybody, she took to her grave. She passed away in 2014. So we're left with other people who may know something in this situation. If you have any information on the death of Arthur Denton, contact the Posey County Sheriff's Department at 812-838-1320. Because a man who spent his own life seeking justice for others shouldn't have to wait forever for his own. Thank you for listening to this episode of River City Mystery. Until next time, take care.